Delighted to be here with you all. Have a fabulous panel here. Would you all introduce yourselves? Maggie, would you go first?
Sure. Thanks, Kate. And thank you so much, Gigi, for having us today. Hi, Storm. I am Maggie Weiland. I'm the Executive Director of the San Francisco Entertainment Commission, which I was just checking out some of the participants here. My former boss is tuning in. Hi, Jocelyn. Our group was formed about 17 years ago, and we work to permit and regulate all of the nightlife venues in San Francisco, as well as outdoor events in the public right-of-way that aren't in parks. Aside from just doing the permitting, we work as best we can to support all of our stakeholders, which during this time has been incredibly challenging. I know I'm preaching to the choir, and we'll hear a whole lot more of that today, but thank you for having me.
Hi, it's Ben Van Houten from the Office of Economic and Workforce Development in San Francisco. I am the Business Development Manager for the Nightlife and Entertainment sector. I started this work about 6 years ago. The position was created out of an economic impact study showing nightlife's value to San Francisco. And so over the last 6 years, I've been working to help businesses one-on-one and also do some policy work to support the industry. Looking forward to this conversation.
Terrific. And certainly last, but certainly not least, Scott.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Plusquellec. I am the nightlife business advocate for the city of Seattle, working in the Office of Film and Music, which is co-connected with the Office of Economic Development. And I parallel what Ben does in San Francisco quite a bit, working both as an advocate for nightlife venues with the city and also developing policy and programs that will support and grow that economic sector. So really happy to be here and see a number of familiar faces in the attendee list, and looking forward to the conversation. Thanks so much.
So on March 2nd, I happened to be with these three people in Seattle, and we were all there for a conference that Scott had been absolutely instrumental in leading and helping to develop. And it was a Nightlife Academy and a Sociable City Summit. And March 2nd was a big day in King County, Washington. We were thrilled to see the exec actually make it through the door to do the closing speech and then dash out of there because he was already dealing with much COVID-19 impact. And we were happy to see Ben and Maggie leave Seattle successfully on a plane homeward bound as COVID-19 was bearing down on King County and Seattle, Washington in a big way. I that day was appointed to a role that is different than my usual role as the creative economy strategist, which is centered in keeping the creative economy going here in King County with a primary focus on film and music production. That day I got co-assigned to being the public health outreach person for King County creative industries and all mass gatherings over 50 people. So since that time, it's really been a crash course in pandemic planning and mitigation. Public health is right there in my building. We no longer work in the building, of course, but they are my immediate colleagues. And so I've been in daily public health meetings ever since then as we work to navigate this and try to figure out how do we get to a safe place for our community, and then how do we get business back up? As many of you, I presume, are closed down and in a stay-at-home state around the country and around the world, this is complex business. So I think each of us are going to speak about what we have been doing and what we are doing going forward. But within that, I just wanted to say that some of the things that we have been doing in King County are working directly with constituents, working directly with public health, making sure there's good two-way channels there between industry stakeholders and public health professionals, because a lot of questions have an answer that is, we just don't know yet. That is what we hear a lot, because this is all new. Coronavirus, no one's ever found a vaccine for a coronavirus before. So this is really deep work that everyone around us is doing. But the nightlife industry has been tremendously impacted, and the live music venue industry very, very impacted for all four of us. So I just want to toss that ball to the other three of you. Scott, do you want to talk about the work you've been doing with stakeholders before we move on to San Francisco and they can talk about their work?
Sure. Thanks, Kate. Sure. I think back to that conference that we were all at here in Seattle right before this hit, and it was a conference that was all about the strengths of the industry and about the strides that we had made in really amplifying the nightlife industry, the whole trends that were happening where cities were paying more attention to nightlife and their music industries, and really looking to the future and trying to figure out what are the next magnificent things that will befall this industry. And in some ways, this has really sort of ripped the blindfold off on that maybe we haven't gotten quite where we thought we were, and exposed some vulnerabilities in this industry that maybe we were not willingly overlooking, but just maybe needed to continue to do some more focus on. And I think that, and I know that Ben and Maggie will talk to that more in a bit, but to me, it was really interesting. One of the first things that we started to do was try to locate resources. These industries, these venues shut their doors immediately and with no forewarning, and there was nothing really set up at that point to help them. It was really striking to me the lack of resources available for a variety of reasons. The size of employees, the fact that they serve alcohol, the fact that they serve people over 21. There were just a number of barriers that regular or other types of retail businesses just didn't have to face in trying to apply for loans and grants. And as these things came online, and more of them came online, it was just increasingly frustrating for me in trying to help them to see, reading through the guidelines and seeing yet another, can't serve alcohol, or, you can't serve just this population. So I think for me, moving forward is really trying to look at that lack of resources and trying to structurally figure out in the future, how do we do something about that and create quicker funding mechanisms for these types of businesses. The good thing that came out of this is that we had a bunch of venues that were not particularly, they had no structure. We had many years ago had a group called the Seattle Nightlife and Music Association that had come together in a similar circumstance with something was being threatening to close their doors. And had disbanded. And shortly after this hit, sort of got some feelers in the community that people were starting to have little conversations and coming together and chatting about looking at this lack of resources. What could they do together to address that? And so reached out to them, the city reached out to them, we brought in the Seattle Music Commission, and really just at the beginning, sort of just helping them, figure out structure and decide how they wanted to organize themselves. And then now they're doing it, and it's fantastic. They're doing fantastic work. But it really brought everybody together in a way that hadn't happened before. And I really am hoping moving into the future that this group will stay together once we've gone past this and help to start addressing some of those vulnerabilities that were exposed by this coming on. So I think that's where I wanted to leave that.
Great, thanks, Scott. Maggie and Ben, take it away. What's going on in San Francisco?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I think our situation and some of the experiences that we've had are very similar and are probably tragically similar across the country and across the world. Over the last 15 plus years, there's been a lot of stride in, I think, removing the stigma around nightlife and live music, and actually building a really positive relationship between the industry and the city, and really recognizing the value of the industry, which is not to say that things are not challenging. In fact, I think, similar to some of the things Scott was saying, we knew this industry was in a fragile state before this hit. And we're, advocating for and working toward strategies to help address those issues beforehand. And now all of that has become, in some ways, so much more urgently needed in terms of assistance, rethinking the costs, the requirements. All of it, I think, is really now, under the microscope, given how fragile this industry is going to continue to be moving forward, and how critical it is to a recovery too. I mean, that
Absolutely.
yeah, that and I think often about in our economic impact study that they did intercept surveys of folks, and 1 out of 3 people, tourists in town from outside of the city, outside of the region, their destination on an evening out was a nightclub or live music venue. So to me, you don't get a full, complete recovery without nightlife and entertainment having a full and complete recovery. That the ripple effects outward are enormous and vital. And so, I think, we're trying to look at this as in a couple of phases. I mean, similarly, everybody's doing, I think, multiple phases of things moving forward. But, certainly we have an eye on long-term, some of the same sort of structural needs that we had been hearing from venue owners and nightlife advocates beforehand about what needed to be done. That long-term stuff is more urgent than ever, because in order to get things at the very least back to where they were previously, but hopefully even better. But in the shorter term, there's a lot of challenges, and sadly, as municipalities are hit with the financial cost of all of this, I think it's going to be really challenging to support and for this industry, until there is. I mean, our governor said, there aren't going to be large mass gatherings until there's herd immunity or a vaccine. And under that lens, that means that we're in this limbo, challenging phase. Many of our stakeholders are in that phase for a long time. Maggie, I don't know if you have other thoughts on your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I'm thinking of it a little bit more chronologically, just like going back to the very beginning of it. I think where we were at when we were in Seattle for that conference, Ben Van Houten and I, and we also had our commission president, Ben Blyman, there. We were riding on a high, to be totally honest with you. I think we had all of these incredible plans for this year and kind of building off of momentum from last year. And we had more permits within, our permit holder database than ever before. And our relationships were good. We didn't have any outstanding bad actors that I was regulating. Things were moving forward in this really beautiful way. And we're also working on some policy changes that are, pretty out there and progressive around our industry. This kind of put a halt to all of that. And I was pretty naive going into this thing. And I think every time I've ever thought about emergencies and emergency response, and my mom has been in emergency management for years and years. And what we have always seen is that, when an earthquake hits or when a tsunami strikes, and afterward, it's our venues that help bring people together, help fundraise, and they're that Band-Aid that kind of brings in that support. And this is the opposite of that. And Ben and I were in these meetings right at the beginning of all of this, with the city administrator, with city attorneys who were talking with the health department and talking about the limitations that we needed to put on all businesses with assembly permits, which a huge amount of our businesses have, right? And talking about limiting the capacity of people in a space. And And so it went kind of from shock and you know, making tons of phone calls to our permit holders and hearing them out and hearing how long can you survive, you know, shuttering your doors, not being able to have people in there, to this mourning phase of knowing, you know, at the end of this, we're not going to see everybody come back, but we are going to see the people who can adapt. And we are going to see the people who are strong and resilient in this. And we're trying our best to communicate with them at all times. And my goal, especially talking to you today, Kate, talking to Jocelyn last week, talking to my boss, is just plugging in with the health department as soon as possible in terms of how we reopen this. We were there when we shut it down. We were there with them, helping them figure out what made sense legally. And we have to be with them on the back end as well, or else, you know, we're not going to be able to allow that adaptability to occur.
Which in some ways is not that different than the work. I mean, the work to date, a lot of it has been telling the story of nightlife and the needs of nightlife in a way that city stakeholders can understand, and doing that kind of, you know, bridging those communication gaps both ways. I mean, that's always been a key part of the work. It's a different lens now, and it's a different set of questions. But I think continuing to be able to amplify the stories of nightlife and music stakeholders and the challenges that they're experiencing, and why those challenges are unique or more urgent or more long-term, and being able to articulate those needs and helping them tell their stories in a way that is meaningful to government. That seems like it's always been the work, but it's now that work more than ever.
I know one of the things that is unfortunate, as we're all trying to figure out these recovery plans and working with our electeds and potentially philanthropists around this work, is that normally when you're doing that and people don't understand the importance of what you're talking about, you can take them to a setting, right? You can take them to a venue, to a show, and say, well, come with me. I'll show you what we're talking about. And we don't have that opportunity now. Everything is tense because everything is closed. And so it is difficult. It's difficult in part because of the complexities around COVID-19, but it's also difficult because a lot of the people making the decisions are going to think that the highest priority is the health of the community, which obviously is the highest priority of the health of the community. But how do you define that? Is it important to have a healthy nighttime culture as part of a healthy community? I certainly think so. And I think that's what we have to convince our policymakers and decision makers of, is the importance of that nighttime economy and culture.
Yeah, here we've been having, the group has been advocating for resources and they have a platform of 5 different asks. But I think one of the strongest tactics that they are taking right now is getting people who come to their venues to write letters to the elected officials about the importance of those venues to them. They make it really personal and talk about the sense of community. And you know, Seattle is, I said this before, I think somebody else might have mentioned this as well, but Seattle is one of the least churched cities in the country. But I would disagree in that I think that our live music venues are, in many ways, our population's churches, and really sort of allowing that essence and that understanding, get that message to the electeds and the people making the decisions to understand that. And so, and I'm really trying to get our venues to start getting themselves ready for eventually down the road what that might look like, and getting into those conversations with public health so that they're at the table and they're not being surprised by any requirements that will be put on them.
I just want to interrupt just because Gigi brought our attention to a question in the Q&A box that I'll just go ahead and read, and if anyone wants to take it, from Tyler Michael Lee. He asks, have nightlife venues looked at having shows following 6 feet guidelines and intense sanitation practices to open earlier than anticipated? Have they looked at having events following the max gathering limitations?
So on March 7th, Scott and I, on very short notice, convened all the nightlife and live music venue owners that we could on very short notice. And there were about 35 of them who came to a meeting with us. And that was as we were going to the 250 person limit on that day, right? So they were trying to figure out, could they operate under that circumstance? Could they be 6 feet apart? Could they do social distancing and sanitation procedures? And then the 50 person limit came very readily behind that, and almost all of them shut down rather readily. Within about 72 hours, they all shut down. But for a live music venue setting, that's very complex. How do you manage a crowd at any kind of mass gathering, but particularly one where there's music playing, it's dark, and it's okay to be dancing and moving? How do you manage a crowd 6 feet apart? That's the quintessential question for our live music venue industry, I think, is how do they get back into business, and how long do we have to do social distancing? And can they sustain a business model under that kind of a framework?
Yeah, my concern with any, I really do think that it is critical for the venues and for the businesses to be a part of these conversations moving forward about what reopening looks like, because I have a concern that any sort of partial opening or any pathway to some potential revenue will be viewed as, oh, well, it's solved for them. Like I think that so restaurants can do delivery and takeout. Oh, okay, well they've got a revenue stream, where we know for a great number of them that's not sufficient, and it's not going to be sustainable in the long term. I think if there are midpoint solutions, that they have to be ones that the industry signs off on. Otherwise, I think we run the risk of deluding ourselves. That there's a possibility out there that isn't really worth its weight.
I would be very surprised to hear our venue owners pivot on this, because in the beginning, when I mentioned Ben and I were making a lot of calls that first week when all of our venues were being shut down based on capacity, we had calls with, I don't know, Ben, 20 venues, like all of our mid to large size venues in the city. And all but one of them agreed that they would rather be closed than try to figure out some kind of a way to keep people apart. I mean, these places are places that are supposed to bring people together. And I don't think anyone even has enough security to make a practice like that happen. But I'd be curious and probably very surprised to hear if folks had changed their mind at this point around that.
Well, and I think part of that, Maggie, was, or maybe looking forward at what it might look like with reopening, part of it is a question around how can you implement that such a system with enough predictability to the rest of business operations that it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think when are tours going to start being booked again, and how is that going to look, and how will venues have confidence there? What does consumer confidence look like in the ability to go out? I mean, it's we can establish any rules. Any set of rules that might be allowed around socialization don't mean that people are going to return. I think that's why it's so important to hear from business owners and to continue, and that the music people need to be at the table advocating on all of this, because the public health piece is one piece, but whether anybody else wants to participate in that system is an open question.
Mm-hmm. Kate, you might want to take it away, but Gigi just let us know we have like 6 or 7 minutes left. Okay. Yeah.
Before we go to more questions, do we have any more questions? Can you tell, Maggie? Are there?
I don't see any, no.
We are questionless at this moment, so if folks would like to share any questions in the Q&A or in the chat to us. Also, can you guys, if someone would like to reach out to you, I know you guys are busy trying to actually make all this happen and make your communities work. Should they outreach through your websites, through emailing you, or are there ways to get active with the work you're doing?
I can only speak for myself, and yes, you can reach out to me via email or phone. And there may be some ways to be active. Some of the folks on this call are active or on the Skype are active right now in the work that we're doing. And before we get to the end of this, I just want to mention that today my boss, King County Executive Dow Constantine, transmitted legislation to the County Council that includes public support for live music venues. Yay!
Yay!
Yes. All right. So, colleagues?
How would you like to be reached out to in your extremely busy selves trying to make this stuff work?
Gigi, I think the links that you provided for San Francisco in the chat, those are great because that will lead folks directly to our contact information as well.
Great. And then, go ahead, sorry.
For me, the website is OFM, Office of Film and Music at Seattle. But you can also use my email, and I can put that in the chat if you want.
That'd be great, thanks. And we're also having, I think Alex, or one of our fabulous people, is moving the chat also over to the Slack channel so people can continue some of these conversations. Now, Kate, you may have said this and I'm blurred. You have King County Creative and a site where people can get additional resources?
Yes, in fact, we have a handbook. It's one of the things we did early on was put together a COVID-19 handbook for the creative industries, and we keep it updated daily. It has been a massive body of work, but it's important to keep all those resources coming forward because the need will exceed the available resources on any given day. So we've really focused on that. We have a Facebook group where we also post a lot of opportunities. But yes, we're doing our best to get information out as quickly as we can. I have to say San Francisco has a pretty great page of resources up as well, as does Scott at the city.
And I think we've posted most of those links in the chat as well for people who want to capture those. I guess my closing question for this session for you guys is there are many people on this call who are not yet dealing with this as deeply as you guys are with the size of city. They might be in smaller communities. Do you have any pieces of advice for people based on your experiences so far?
My advice would be to open that channel with your local public health officials as early as you possibly can so that you have established relationship before you're into very complex situations, so that they know you're going to advocate for your constituencies and the sectors you represent early on, and that doesn't come to them as a surprise down the road when, for example, the food bank's running out of food or some critical issue like that. You want to be established in relationship with them before that. Also, so when your business owners call with specific questions, you have an easy ally to reach out to. I can think of lots of reasons to connect early with public health.
And I would add, get your venues to organize. Get your business owners to start talking to each other. Get them to unify on a message, unify on a simple message, unify on simple asks. But it's really, really important in this time for the community to talk with one voice and to make their case.
Ben, sorry, I was just gonna say that for San Francisco, some of our updates, at least as we move forward, we are absolutely going to be taking Seattle's advice on, continuing to push that relationship with the health department, as well as to bring our folks together, because we've seen a few ad hoc groups forming in San Francisco, and we want to make sure they're talking to each other. The other pieces are that San Francisco is launching an economic recovery task force starting tomorrow, which I will be on along with 49 other people, including my commission president, Ben Blyman, and a couple other industry folks, which will be really good that our voices are at the table there. And Ben Van Houten is also going to be involved in that effort, which cannot be done without the health department as well. And so we're hoping that the relationships we already have, we can utilize while we're in that group. The other thing that I'll mention is just that we are currently working on a social media campaign, a survey to our constituents, as well as a virtual summit that we'll go ahead and invite Gigi to, and she can push that out to all of her mailing lists. So hopefully you guys can attend in the middle of May. Those are my updates. Ben, do you have anything to add?
Well, geez, after that list.
Sorry.
No, I think that not providing business owners or any stakeholders with any sort of false hope or we should be prepared, all of us, that this is going to be a long journey, and that it's going to require sustained advocacy and sustained work for a long time to recover. And let alone build upon the system that we had before coronavirus. And so that's going to be a real challenge. But that's the work in front of us.
So I want to comment, thank you guys very much for being part of it. If you'd like to hear some of Kate's other wisdoms, she's been on several different recordings now with Music Policy Forum, and you heard them earlier today. Also in the chat, someone said to announce that the Artist Relief Fund first cycle deadline is today at midnight, thinking Eastern, for artists that are in super need right now. Good to know. I was just going to comment one thing that Kate said in the past that really caught my ear, and I'm big on who's missing in the conversation. That Kate, you did mention something in an early session that you did, that part of the challenge sometimes is getting to communities that you don't necessarily have a conversation with in public health. So whether it's folks doing underground events, etc., I think there's some really rich things that are in the recordings and things you guys are sharing elsewhere. So I want to thank you very much for all your work.
Right back at you. Thanks for having us, Gigi.
Yeah,
Thank you, my dear.
Thank you very much.
Guys.